Allegations say they've served legal papers on him, according to a document filed in a New York court. Prince Andrew is reported to have been at Balmoral recently, and lawyers representing Virginia Giuffre say that the civil lawsuit was handed to a Metropolitan Police officer who was on duty at the Royal Lodge at Windsor Great Park on August the 27th. Well, Prince Andrew has always denied all allegations against him, and Sky News understands that the papers were not served on the Prince in person. Dame Cressida Dick is going to remain in charge of the Metropolitan Police in London. She'll remain in post until 2024, a 2-year extension to her appointment, which was due to end next April. And that's despite opposition from high-profile victims of injustice who accused her of presiding over a culture of incompetence and cover-up. The economy grew less than expected in July by 0.1%, even though many businesses were able to fully open for the first time in months. The figure for June was 1%. Well, companies were experiencing shortages of materials and, of course, labour shortages due to the pandemic. A second commercial flight carrying international passengers left Afghanistan's capital, Kabul, yesterday. The Qatar Airways plane with British nationals on board has now successfully landed in Doha. It follows last month's Western airlift after the departure of US and NATO forces.
Every Afghan is angry. They should have done much better. They spent 20 years in Afghanistan, and they led Afghanistan in the same spot when they went there.
An investigation by Yorkshire County Cricket has found that Azim Rafiq was the victim of racial harassment and bullying at the club. The England and Wales Cricket Board said it will examine the report and decide what further action to take. Rafiq has previously told Sky News that the abuse left him feeling close to suicide. Now, on Wednesday night, the House of Commons voted by a majority of 71 in favour of a 1.25% percentage point rise in national insurance contributions to deal with the NHS treatment backlog and to reform social care in England. Well, now, there are reports that the government may consider council tax increases to pay for social care in addition to the controversial hikes to national insurance. Our political correspondent Kate McCann has the latest from Westminster.
I think it's important to just take this story for what it is, because at the moment it's not a policy change. The government hasn't actually decided to do this. This is some concern from ministers ahead of the spending review, which is going to come up next month, that the government might allow councils to increase the social care precept. Now, that's something that some of us will pay at the moment, some of us won't. In fact, around a third of councils that can charge this additional top-up don't do that at the moment. But it's local government allowed to charge for the cost of social care, effectively, in their local areas. And at the minute, it's around 3% on top of your council tax bills. That's where the government has set the limit. Now, this story is suggesting that the government could increase that, so it could go up by 4 or 5%. Potentially. And there are some ministers who are telling the Telegraph that they're very worried about it. They fear it would hit those people hardest who will already be paying a 1.25 percentage point increase on their national insurance. That, of course, was voted through the House of Commons this week. It's controversial. The government says it needed to level with people, social care is expensive, but one of the real sticking points in this debate has been that that money actually won't go to social care for 3 years, and that's what's behind this conversation about council tax, because if social care isn't going to be funded or isn't going to get any extra cash for 3 years, councils are still going to have to pay for it. Now, we have got a government spokesperson statement on this story. They say we will ensure every council has the resources they need to deliver these reforms, with extra money invested next year and 5.4 billion by 2024-25. We've taken decisive and historic action to fix this crisis that governments have docked for decades, ending the catastrophic care costs that can currently affect 1 in 7 people. Details of core local government funding, including flexibility for local authorities to set council tax, will be set out at the spending review in the usual way. So there will be lots of MPs, including in the Conservative Party, who will be looking very, very carefully at what Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, sets out in that spending review, because they will be worried that if the council tax precept, the social care precept, is allowed to increase, it could hit people really hard in their pockets.
Now, coronavirus infections in Scotland and Wales are at their highest levels for several months. Across the UK, a further 37,622 new cases of coronavirus were reported in the latest 24-hour period, and 147 more people died after contracting COVID-19. That takes the total number of deaths within 28 days of a positive test to 133,988. Another 25,744 first doses of a COVID vaccine have been given, while 96,702 people received their second dose. In total, over 43.8 million people are now fully vaccinated against COVID-19. Well, those figures don't include so-called booster jabs or doses for 12 to 15-year-olds. Both have been controversial, and the government is expected to announce whether they'll be going ahead next week. Our health correspondent Ashish Joshi reports.
The COVID infection rate here is the highest it's been since Christmas. The rise in infections, 1 in every 65 people in Wales had COVID in the first days of September, has put the health system under huge pressure.
Until now, this rise has been manageable. But with the rapid spread of coronavirus in our communities, pandemic pressure on the NHS is increasing once again.
In Scotland, infections are soaring too, the highest since estimates began last October. Rising cases have prompted the country to introduce mandatory vaccine passports. In England, infection numbers are stable. My blood pressure's fine. It's one less thing for doctors like Rosie Brooks to worry about. Next week, her surgery should be starting its winter flu campaign, but that's been put on hold while the government waits for JCVI advice about COVID boosters.
We haven't been told whether it's safe to give them together. In theory, it makes sense, but we need to be given the absolute sign-off on that. We can't just go ahead and do what we think is right.
What sort of pressure does that place on your surgery?
It's a lot more work. Once they've geared up to come in for a vaccine, it's nice to just get both done there and then.
The concerns expressed here are caused by the uncertainties, the not knowing, and they'll be shared in surgeries and clinics across the country. Patients are asking questions, and from now, there are no answers to give them. While Britain waits, other countries are making choices. The Prime Minister learning from his Chilean counterpart about their inoculation programme.
I think that you're now going to vaccinate younger people as well, is that right?
We started with children 3 years old until 11.
My goodness.
As the government fends off criticism of stalling, the rest of us have taken our first tentative steps back towards normality. Key decisions to safeguard our futures have yet to be taken. Ashish Joshi, Sky News.
Now, British teenager Emma Raducanu says reaching the US Open final is a dream come true after becoming the youngest ever British player to achieve that feat. The 18-year-old from Bromley beat her opponent in straight sets to set up an all-teenage showdown and a place in the history books. Our sports correspondent Tom Parmenter reports.
She makes it look so simple. Emma Raducanu is yet to drop a set in the US Open. This extraordinary winning streak should have ended by now, but this fearless 18-year-old just keeps making history.
I always had dreams of playing in Grand Slams, but I just didn't know when they would come, and to come this early and at this point in my career. I've only really been on tour for a month, 2 months since Wimbledon, so it's pretty crazy to me.
Women's tennis now has a teenage revolution on its hands. In the final on Saturday, she'll face Leylah Fernandez from Canada, ranked 73rd in the world, and who only turned 19 last week.
In my era, it was, there was Graf and Sellis.
Joe Jury once shared that same stage in the US Open semi-final back in 1983.
We've gone quite mad here, and why not? We're excited, and we can see the possibilities that Emma has. She has such a complete game, and she seems mentally to be very on top of it. But I think the story of two teenagers getting to a final of a Grand Slam that nobody's really heard of has just, tennis is being talked about everywhere, and I absolutely love it.
ripple effect is bubbling throughout British tennis. At Raducanu's primary school in Bromley, South London, they can't quite believe it.
She's just amazing in everything that she does. She's great, and she really inspires a lot of tennis players to be like her. And as she's such a young age, it just makes people know that anyone can do it. I'm very inspired, and I'm going to a tennis club called Park Conway, and I'm going to start trying my very, very, very best to be like a world-famous tennis player like Emma Raducanu that used to go to our school.
She showed huge potential for years, but her breakthrough came at Wimbledon this summer. When she withdrew from her last 16 game here due to breathing difficulties on court, it seemed that she wasn't quite ready. But now, gliding through to the final of the US Open has shown that she seems ready for anything. And so more history beckons in her first Grand Slam final. Saturday night in New York.
Have you recovered well from yesterday?
Oh, good, thanks.
There's a fairy tale to finish. Tom Parmenter, Sky News.
Stay with us here on Sky News. Coming up, we've got the rest of the sport, including why Manchester United fans won't have to wait much longer to